Dun, 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 dun. Oh, hey, there you are. What's going on? Thanks for stopping by. Oh my gosh, it's good to see you. Well, ready or not, Blazor. Been messing around for a good 5 or 6 days now with the Blazor framework. Stood up a bit of a kitchen sink and have taken a few particular parts of it to task and wanted to kind of share some of that progress and I don't know, reflect along the way on the Blazor development experience. First, the non-Blazory stuff. We spin up a new project. Going to want to separate out, sort of some shared libraries and DLLs and the infrastructure to bind those libraries to whatever sort of persistence or database model that you're going to be using. So this is all EF core. Should be pretty boring. Now, I have models, and then I have these models to gen. And so all of my projects, when I begin working with them and creating these POCO or plain old CLR object models, then I watch this particular models to gen folder for different file patterns. Most all the files in that folder are consumed. And then if I come up here to these code gens, then I can just regenerate parts of the application based on what I see. So as I change those C# models, of course, ND framework, DB context, and migration stuff helps me manage SQL as schema and migrate my schema changes to my database. But I also then can forward generate view models. I can forward generate the DB context mapper. I can forward generate a getting started, the most boring plumbing for auto mapper. We'll see how that's used. API endpoints, a little bit of a Ruby on Rails play. I generate generic API endpoints for these objects, and then we protect all of that stuff, so it's not so loosey goosey. All right, so I'm not really here to teach all that, but let's look at just a little bit of it. So if we come into this models to gen, I just created my new string and didn't realize I was on mute the whole time. So I guess I will delete my new string. Go ahead and save that. If I come over to the API now, and let's say do a little build, migrations, add, remove new string. All right. .env database update, just keeping that nice and clean. And if we look in our API, we could see a new migration was created to remove, to drop this new string column, right? So there's our SQL being managed, nothing new under the sun there. Let's get that back up. Now the other stuff, if we look in our models, ViewModel partial chat, we see this string exists. So if we come up here in our code gen and rerun the ViewModel code gen, we come back here and look at chat, and that has been removed, right? So it manages these ViewModel files. It's also, I mentioned, if we look at the domain to ViewModel mapping file, the kind of generic map file for AutoMapper, getting us started there. The infrastructure DB context file, so all these are mapped and managed for you and for me anyway. And then, of course, I just break out partials when I want to overload the gen. Pretty nice, clean patterns. All right, so now we have data. We have a nice way to manage our databases. I mentioned we're generating the API controller endpoints for active record mappings and sometimes some clever domainy stuff. It's getting better. It's a new one. So that's cool. That's cool. Now we have an API, so that's just like the backend place we would call that would wrap and access the data in the database. We had identity server. We're not going to spend any time there, but that's everybody's looking to for security. We got pub sub, SignalR, socket IO level connection. So anytime we want, the folks using our Blazor WASM app, even though it doesn't require SignalR, we still have an opportunity to bind to an active SignalR context and participate in that real-time push-pull conversation. And we get down here to UI, and we finally get to do some Blazor stuff. So like I mentioned, I think in this, so let me mention it again. Maybe it was the last recording. There are a few things I want Blazor to do day one, And I like to consider it sort of boring plumbing. And so let's take a look at some of those. The first thing is through security, and the whole point of having identity server bind and or stand in for security, we have authorization and authentication. We have, is your username and password correct? And we have, now that you're here, what do you have rights to do? Where do you belong? And I like to make sure when we're delivering client, especially delivered client apps like this, that if you don't log in or haven't logged in or fail to log in, we don't want to deliver any sensitive client code to your machine until after you've done that. So we have to get involved in the router. And so here in Blazor, done a little bit to create a scenario where we can lazy load all of our on-screen behaviors based on kind of where you're at and where you're going. And if you hit a security moment and you fail to cross it appropriately, you'll never receive those JavaScript packages. You'll never receive any of the DLLs because yeah, you don't deserve them. So that's all this is about. Kind of pretty verbose and gross at the moment while I learn and think about things. But if we're over in the admin section, or we're in the authenticated user section, or we're over in the license sections, different levels of behavior around authorization. And so participant here is a package of roles where having is in role admin is just a basic role. And then maybe over here is just, are you just logged in, right? And so we need to be asking different questions at different times to some varying degree. All right, cool. So we now have our router protecting our modules that we want to have secured. And so we come in here to lazy modules and we see something here like we've got this logged in user individual module. Maybe they have a profile page, etc. Right. All right, so here's the site. We're loaded up. Let's get logged out here. So we have a basic website and we can try to go places and it won't let us. And if I dug into all the nerdy stuff, you'd see that until we satisfy a login, we aren't delivered any of those client packages. And if we continue to fail, then it'll simply continue to not deliver. All right, so now this is a site that most of you'll be familiar with. It exercises some of the basic behaviors, helps us understand what's being passed through in policy and different sort of parts of the authentication system, claims-based authentication system, fetching real-time data from a backend API, some client-based variable incrementing. And then I've brought in these lazy loaded modules. So if I now reach over to this module because of who I am and how I'm logged in, I was able to pull it down. And then I can now move through this module, right? And we actually have some data on screen and can do things, right? Cool. We also have decent form, and so this is one of the more recent things I was working on, but an ability to easily generate attractive forms that provide smart, healthy, helpful feedback and information, and both protects on the client as well as server side if somebody were to attempt to hijack and republish this information to the backend server. Is it also protecting itself against these types of violations? All of that honoring the out of the box, most basic Microsoft behaviors. So we don't want to get too far from Blazor if we can help it. So let's take some of these problems down. The other thing you saw we're going to look at is internationalization throughout. So if we do open one of these Razor files, we are going to find an amount of, all right, well, not that one, these localization tags. And even something as clever as this form here, if we flip over to Japanese, we'll see that translations have been provided in a pretty robust way to even those lazy loaded modules. So if I were to violate submitting this form, I'm seeing 4 different levels of translation on this screen, and everything seems to be working nicely, right? Konnichiwa, French, and symbolic Japanese. Why not, right? Pretty darn cool. All right, so how do we support some of this? On the back end, if we look at, like we said, we decorated these lazy modules, so user individual itself is a completely separate Razor project. It's a Razor class library styled project, Razor with an R, not a B, so a more traditional, older Razor style pages, but Blazor syntax works. Didn't change, however you're supposed to say that. It's confusing. All right, so we have this idea of profile. I did at the last minute go ahead and just pick a vendor, so I'm gonna marry into Telerik for a little while and see how that feels. But a lot of this you get pretty much out of the box. And so here is the effort of describing that on-screen form, right? Where even labels are being localized, placeholders have been localized, validation messages have been localized. Everything is localized, which is the biggest part of the effort here. The rest of this is largely genable or so consistent that I see myself building gen files to create. So the bulk of it doesn't really, it's a little noisy, but we get so much for free. I'm not mad at it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's nice. That gives us this kind of an experience here. And so as we move around, we see this one, you required an elevated account. And if we again were to look closely, we never received any code that's hiding behind this login. If we come in as a different login, and we are able to access that component, then it will go ahead and download. Another thing that I was able to get to is if we look in this UI's project, we also have tests. So a pretty simple factory to bind Selenium to the browser. Then we start in with our Gherkin feature files. And so can I log in, be denied access to certain pages? We bind then, so we've written these wrappers to support what those pages should look like and what logic we're going to use then so that it's friendly for our code to write tests and to bind to those HTML pages without having to deal with that nomenclature called page object pattern. And then we have finally our binding steps. And so these bind that human readable language. It's mostly just like a controller pattern. It should just take the human binding language from the feature file it left and the executable sort of logic coming from the page object models at right and bind them all together with some assertions perhaps around. And we use fluent assertions. So this idea of should be is just a fluent assertion on current title equals what the homepage title thinks it should be, right? All right, so standing up those tests means if we pop open a new window here, grab the path, do us a .NET build, make sure life is good, do a .NET test. We could be more specific and do different things. We'll just take what's there, and we see that it's opened a browser, it's attempting to navigate to the site, it's attempting to look around, click login, do different things, and it should ultimately come back with all green lights. My hands aren't doing anything, it's all automated tests. That was pretty cool. You gotta love Gherkin and you gotta love automated tests these days. Tools like Selenium for simulating the UI just make it very easy and very kind to write these tests, and they don't have to be brittle in the way that they used to be. So there you go. We had 4 tests run, all driven by this very human readable language, and that's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. So yeah, Nice. Let's see what's next. Let's take a quick look at CSS. The world of CSS has taken kind of a hard turn recently. And before, anytime you would say anything in CSS, it would impact your entire application. And now it's kind of the opposite. It's always componentized CSS, where the objects themselves are generating unique tags and shoving them into your CSS, and you have to do a little bit of work, sometimes a lot of work, if you actually want to share those behaviors. So I kind of like to sidestep the whole issue. We could see normal CSS exists, and this is from .NET New Blazor by and large. So we have some kind of built in. Then we have a little bit more mature concept if we move up into like this user module. Handling Sass completely outside of the build pipeline, completely outside of Visual Studio, but any SCSS files that appear will be compiled out into CSS files, and then those CSS files will be smashed down into the final Blazor assembly. And even across the lazy loaded module behavior, what I wanted was an opportunity to flow, cascade some style sheets down, hence its name, cascading style sheets. There is no more cascading. I guess now they're just called style sheets. So if we look at what we can do if we bring Sass or some compiled CSS into the mix, right, then we have an opportunity to set some larger opinions in sort of these style, well, anywhere you want, but I've set some global stuff here in styles that all the pages would be able to reach up and borrow if they wanted, or import if they wanted. And then, of course, they can do their own local thing. So here we have, the color green is being specifically passed into this user module by the Blazor CSS containerized module binder thing. Yeah, I don't know. And then we also see an opportunity here. We have this like primary color blue, we have blue. If we come into a given page, we're going to see over and over again an anchor tag just demonstrating this behavior. So this anchor tag is green because the profile razor tag says use, and it imports this individual user module, which would be chilling up here in this styles tag, right? And so that gets us to green. Now, if we go back down here and we jump over to like private, also thinks it's green. Let's go to one that doesn't. So this one thinks it's purple. So if we look at the local Sass file, we see that this is overriding, well, there is no more inheritance. So in order for this to override something, we'd literally have to say, watch this, if, and this could be a pattern that emerges, we'll see. Cool, because it's Sass, I could do that. Right? Now, if everybody inherited from like one global Sass file, then overloaded things to their heart's delight, you now have this opportunity to have one kind of shared Sass experience that flows down. This is the equivalent, except without that use statement and the fact that there is no more cascading, you no longer have that sort of base inheritance. Having said that, if we look at yeah, okay. So everybody that wanted any opinion, like if we remove that from private, I imagine the anchor will be black or whatever a default anchor tag looks like. If I left everything running, where am I trying to go? Individual. Spinning up over here. Then what, private? I don't know. So default link behaviors, right? It neither inherited from the world or anyone else. It's just got no class opinion at all. All right, well, there's what we know about CSS. So if you do want to have an opportunity to both share and not share and sometimes share, kind of like CSS is known for. It's backwards now, so it'll be by default all containerized, but now you have an option and a pretty nice way to go about managing that. And you should definitely be working with container compiled CSS so that you can be making much better use of your time. All right, on to the next topic. Oh, I hope you're getting something out of this. All right, so before we separate on this little update and I give you kind of my closing thoughts, I want to show you what became of localization. So I hadn't done as much with it in quite a while, and I never had been responsible for implementing the whole thing. And so as I started to decorate my project with these RESX files, right? So, doo, doo, doo. Oh, I've hidden them from this view. So as I started to decorate my project and keep these RESX files up to date, which was never easy and always gross, but it's essentially just a key value map between what it should look up and then given the language you're in, what it should reply as. And so we end up with language translation files for each of the languages that we're after, and then following some patterns, we're then using the iString localizer pattern in Blazor to bind at the component level. So they're a component level shared language file. And then I've got a little pattern I've started where I also have a shared language base, shared language file. Now, because I had such an easy time with this pattern here of @localize, which is really just a made up, right? We've just given the variable name here that we've injected the localizer into called localize. I've also gone ahead, if we look at the pattern from this angle, and I've bound to that shared language base and called that localize share. So every Blazor component, be it in a lazy loaded module or in the primary application, they're all going to participate the same. They're all going to have access to a global that's managed by the root, and then they can each manage their own opinions of things. And over time, that may or may not get more clever, just building something. All right, so now that we are on a page and it's doing its own localization and we see some global localization, we built a bit of a fluent behavior. If we come to root, shared validators, and so injecting those localizers into these validators and abstracting those out. And then we have the opportunity for the globalized or the localized share file. So error is required. Well, that's a key that everybody's going to use the same answer to. Why you? Well, that's more personal to the page, right? All right, so we've decorated all our code with all these things. One simple way to pivot from here, if we look at shared language base, is again just this desire to have a very clean @localize bracket pattern, a keyword, and then a close bracket. And so this is really what this parser is all going to be based on. I'm going to show you next. Excuse me. If we flip over to this little critter, I call him Languish, because I'm languishing. I spent, I don't know, about 5 hours, and I pivoted out that problem of managing all those RESX files. In a first pass, the MapFileCrate service just goes and finds all the files that are in our project that have those localization tags that we care about. So any of the CS, Razor, HTML files. It builds up using SQLite, a fake little on-disk cachy databasey critter right here, full of what it finds. Then it goes out and looks to see if there's an Excel file where it wants one. If there isn't, it'll help create one. If there is, it'll gently work with it, not destroy it. It's going to help create within that Excel file. Let me just open it. It's going to create within this Excel file one tab for every component that it finds that has that language, token language in it. And then it's going to provide a template and an opportunity to provide, the English, French, Japanese, and I just made up the letters TA. I don't know what this is supposed to be. But we could support anything, right? And so now working with localization of my files becomes pretty straightforward. I mean, I could even just flat out write blocks. Where are we here? We're in fetch data. That was boom, 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 boom. That was actually down here in fetch data. And so localizing your file could look like this, where you go ahead and just, make sense to yourself, or you could use keys, however you want to do it. A key is valid no matter how big it is or if it has spaces. It's not a big deal to the computer. So this feels nice. It feels like a nice way to deal with localization if that's something that comes up for you. And then having a nice little robot that if you come to say, I don't know, let me just come in here and say localize. I'm going to say new error type value. Yeah, I don't know. Let's save that critter. Let this guy run. It's going to complain that I have the language file open. It's actually really fast, but I slowed him down so that it doesn't frustrate the file watcher system over here. When I went full speed, this guy would just throw up and quit watching, period. He would complain, too many files change at once, I give up. So I did slow him down just a little to cope with that. If we pull this language file back open now, it did find that shared language space page already, so it didn't need to add the new tab, but it did notice it needed to add this new column value. And so we could go ahead and translate that, and anytime we referenced it, then in our project, it would be translated. Oh, man. So all in all, Blazor has been a blast. I don't know that I will ever write Angular again unless somebody really needs me to. If you are comfortable with earlier languages where mostly, error messaging is the biggest issue. You're going to spend an amount of time not knowing what question to ask or what's wrong. And if that's something, if you're seasoned enough that that's no big deal, you'll probably have a blast. If you're trying to just get started and learn, I feel like you're going to want to wait, maybe some more months and kind of see how that comes along. I imagine that would be a really abysmal experience. It would not be fun. Outside of a good relationship between the debug slash, it's not even debugging, it never wants to tell you why it's unhappy. Other than that, it's, like I said, a wonderful stack. It's been great to work in. I can't say enough high things about it at this early stage. Looking forward to see it grow up and continue to swallow market. You're looking at about a third as much code so far, right? Even with all the drama I just showed you, a third as much code as what I would be dealing with in Angular. So pretty excited to keep leaning in, dealing with little problems as they come up. Probably go find a community out there somewhere to join. And until next time, thanks for hanging out. Hope you have a beautiful day, and we'll see you later. Cheers. I love these languages. Let's see it in French. Aha! Let's see it in Japanese. Too good. Too good. I hope you have gotten something out of this. Yeah, the counters, everything. Headers. Yeah, too good. Cheers. Bye-bye.